He said to me, people like us don't work in media. There's nobody that looks like us there. The only time I see Asians is when they were talking about how they were in gangs or how they were like taking over the country. Ultimately, I wanted to get into media so I can put a different point of view. I can go to ITV and say, I'm going to build this media brand. I'm going to get 4,500 products. I'm going to work with the biggest celebrities in the world. And they say, how? Or I'll say, well, look at historical evidence. Every single thing that I've done, everybody said is not possible. So if I've done it there and I've done it for this brand and I've done it for this brand, statistically, it should mean that I can do it for my brand. We're essentially redefining wellness for Gen Z.
Welcome to the Bay HQ, where we inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians. Smash that subscribe button if you watch this on YouTube, and if it's a 5-star review if you're watching this on Apple or Spotify. Today we have with us Stephen Mai, who's the founder and CEO of Woo. They're a media brand and marketplace that's redefining wellness for Gen Z, and they're backed by ITV. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, great. So how you met was really interesting because you were just sitting on the same table as me at our co-working space.
Probably talking shit.
Yeah, definitely. And I just heard some of the stuff you were saying and it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. Then I was kind of slyly Googling you on the side. Yeah. And okay, I want to talk to this guy. Then
how did you get my name?
Because I think you were talking to that person. I think you were on a call or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you had your Zoom open so I could see your name on your Zoom.
Oh, okay.
It's very stalkerish how it worked out. It's like, okay, this guy's really cool. I want to chat to him.
Yeah.
Then it's like, oh, hi, by the way. But like when we chatted, you also talked about how what you're doing now, it wasn't necessarily expected of you when you were growing up.
Yeah.
And you had a very different path kind of laid out for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that? Like, what did you think you'd be when you were growing up?
Yeah, well, I'm Asian Australian. I come from, I guess, like a first generation immigrant background. And, you know, like when your parents are like refugees and have built everything from scratch and given you every opportunity that they never had, the expectation is you become a doctor, you work in finance, or you do something that is going to make you money. I've always been less of a math person and more of I guess like a creative person. So it didn't really connect. So like, you know, in my head, I always thought, oh, okay, I'll do economics or I'll be in finance. And the way that I kind of tied it to the fantasy of like, you know, wanting to be creative and working media is I'd just be like, oh, I'd watch movies and TV shows and be like, oh yeah, well, this character's a lawyer and this character's in finance. I can imagine a life where that could be possible, but obviously I just wasn't very good at those things. So yeah, and I guess like even when I told my dad that I wanted to work in media, he kind of said to me, like, people like us don't work in media. There's nobody that looks like us there. Like, they will never accept you, which isn't necessarily untrue from where we were standing in Australia. Like, the media is exceptionally white. It's also very, there's a lot of nepotism and like, you know, there was no way for me to get in. And when I did, I was one of the very few people of color in the businesses that I worked for. So they weren't wrong, but I guess like I've been able to kind of develop or build my own path to kind of, I guess, work in media. And, you know, I've been able to kind of work for some of the brands that I've always like admired. So like, you know, MTV was my first job. I did that in Australia. It's the best place I've ever worked.
Considering your dad said that to you, Did you ever doubt that media was the right path? Or how did you actually go about getting that first job and getting into the industry?
So I actually left uni. So I studied economics at university, year one, bailed. And then I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to transfer to a degree where there's stuff that I'm interested in. I ended up doing media and cultural studies. And that was really cool and interesting. And I guess I just started meeting people that were, I guess, like in terms of interest, in terms of passion points, were more aligned with mine. I left and I became a travel agent because I love traveling and I couldn't find a job in media. And actually the only job that even came close to media was an internship at a magazine called Picture Magazine, which is owned by, I guess, like the Condé Nast of Australia. At the time it was called APC or ACP. Picture Magazine was basically almost like a porn magazine. And it was an editorial assistant role for like, that was paying like 10K pound a year, and I didn't get it. And then after became a travel agent, and to be honest, I didn't really know how I was going to get into media, but I had a friend that got a job at MTV, and because I saw that he had done it, it made me think that maybe it wasn't impossible. And, you know, that's what I pursued. And that's how I ended up in MTV. First job was just I was willing to take any job. So first job, I was just moving ads around. And it was like a really boring job. But I was so excited because I was in the building. I could see all these other jobs that I wanted and see all these people being creative and doing things that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I can see all this in real life. And because I could see all the jobs, it then became a very clear path of how I wanted to get there. So I just went into campaign mode because I saw that actually the people that were doing my job, they'd been around for years and they're still doing that job. And I was like, there's no way I can do this job for like 2-3 years. So I just started volunteering for everything. I started like finding ways to show people how creative I was. And that eventually evolved into a role that I wanted in the department that I wanted. And that's pretty much the beginning of my career in the world of media.
What was that first role that you actually wanted? What did you do?
So
there?
it was a client partnerships role in ad sales. And the reason why I really wanted that role was the Asian side of me was like, well, I need to find a creative job that will be commercial, that will fund a career. So advertising seemed to make sense. It was also a very central role, which meant that you worked with creative, you worked with production, you worked with marketing, and you worked with programming, and you worked with talent, which means that I knew that having that role would give me a really good understanding of all the different departments, how they work. And also because you were leading kind of like 360 projects that encompassed events, TVC and all this stuff, it meant that I was also thinking very much about how am I going to build my CV. And to be able to kind of say, then you've, worked on campaigns for big brands on the MTV Awards, and this is what you executed and all this other stuff. It felt to me like the quickest pathway to build a portfolio of work that was interesting and tangible and also encompassed a lot of different areas in case I needed to diversify down the line. So even moving to creative, I was constantly thinking about like, how do I future-proof what I'm trying to do here?
You mentioned that about the CV and the portfolio.
Yeah.
What were you, I guess, building that portfolio towards? Did you have a dream?
I guess in my head, I was like, I decided that I wanted to be in marketing, but also I knew the marketing department at MTV was a really hard one to get into. I guess and then there was the other part, was like, I wanted to work in content. So I was writing for the website for free, actually, in my spare time. And so there were two paths, essentially, and I was happy with either. So I needed to hedge my bets to make sure that I had enough stuff that I could basically go in either of those directions.
And then after that, you did quite a few other big roles, right?
Yeah.
And where did you go on from MTV?
So MTV, I decided, MTV was great because it allowed me to kind of do a lot. And Australia's not a very big market. So it was like, what else do I do in Australia? I decided at that point I wanted to move to London because I wanted to kind of do more things and kind of be a part of the global culture. And in my head, I was like, well, I really want to work for a place like Vice. So that was kind of in my vision board. Came to the UK and there was I did freelance for MTV. I worked for a couple of agencies, but Vice was kind of the goal. And actually right before my visa was about to expire, I got a job at Vice in marketing. Within that role, it was, driving audience, building brand for all of the Vice channels and ID, which was a massive, crazy dream because I never in my wildest dream could imagine I could work for a global fashion magazine like that. So that was kind of my first big role in the UK. Then I went on to ASOS for a bit, I guess the first big marketing job at LadBible, where I basically turned them from a clickbait publisher into kind of a platform for social change. And within that, I did big campaigns around mental health. I did the Trash Aisles, which is I guess it was the first really big plastic in the ocean campaign. It ended up winning all the awards. It's one that I'm really proud of. And then post that, I was at Boiler Room where I kind of led the content marketing and design division and kind of help run the company with the CEO. And then I guess after that, it was I was feeling a bit burnt out and I ended up moving to Bali for this really great job at a company called Potato Head. And that was really interesting, but it was essentially a job in London in Bali. So pandemic hit, left Bali and I had the headspace and I was like, okay, well, what do I want to do? After Boiler Room, I decided I didn't want to work for any more people and I wanted to create a new media brand, but I also knew that the media model didn't really work. And we've seen that with BuzzFeed News and Vice and all these companies that have now kind of fading into oblivion. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to build a media brand, it needs to be built on a different model. So that's where I kind of created Woo. It's a model that is built around e-commerce and I wanted to create it built around a purpose. And because of the state of the world and because I think media and society has done a really good job, I guess, informing people with information around kind of mental health and anxiety, and everyone has the language around it, but actually nobody has the solutions. And any of the solutions and rituals that exist are very kind of, I guess, like they're very targeted to like middle class white women. And they're not very cool, not very aspirational, not aligned with culture. So I was like, okay, well, what if you took all those things that could be helpful to a lot of people and you put it through a youthful cultural lens? So you made it more ID, more hype beast, and less goop. And that's kind of how Woo came about. And I basically decided, I've got this idea, I'm going to like do the startup route. It just so happened that someone posted on LinkedIn that ITV was going to fund the next generation media businesses. I was like, well, this is a foolproof proposition. I built a career on doing things that everyone said was impossible. So I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to submit it. And then I did. And essentially 6 months later, I did 6 months of pitching, and then they funded it. And then we launched it in April last year. And yeah, we just turned a year old.
So you mentioned there like amazing journey. And you said about how you left Australia for London.
Yeah.
Because of the opportunities.
Yeah.
And you said when you were growing up, you thought there wasn't really opportunities for people who look like you in Australia.
Yeah.
Did you find that when you moved here that the attitudes were different? Did you find more doors open, or what was your experience there?
So the difference is, I feel like being Asian in Australia, Asians are the dominant minority. So that being the dominant minority means also the attention, sometimes negative attention, is placed on people that look like me. So like, I guess like in the UK, where the differences was like being East Asian isn't the dominant identity. So actually like pre-COVID, you're pretty much invisible, right? So in some ways it was different because it felt quite freeing to not see yourself in the news and not see the moral panic around kind of like people that look like you and all that other stuff. Not that it's any better seeing it targeted towards other groups, but like it was a difference. But I would say, was it more welcoming? Probably not. Like I think in the UK, there's definitely a bias around kind of like new people trying to get into an industry. But I think once you establish yourself, it does become quite, I guess, like more open. But I don't know, like I would be lying if I didn't see a lot of nepotism, and if I didn't see, like until very recently, a lack of diversity. Like I wouldn't be wrong in saying that I was always one of 2 or 3 Asians in an entire company, if there was even 2 or 3 Asians. So yeah.
How do you think you smashed through that glass ceiling? Or like, how did you get yourself a seat at the table?
I think there was a point, and I don't know if this is a controversial thing to say, but I think there was a point where I realized that I needed to stop thinking like a first generation Asian Australian, like, and that meaning like the things that my parents taught me, like be humble, head down, work hard, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, you still have to work hard. Yes, you have to do all that stuff. But actually, if I look at some of the other groups that are succeeding, or the dominant group, what they do is they say things with bravado. They oversell what they do, and they're really good at communicating and building relationships with people that are going to drive their career. So essentially, at a certain point, I was like, I'm achieving all these things. They're all tangible results. I'm not necessarily progressing the way other people are. So I guess like what I started to think is like, well, maybe I need to start thinking like a white man. So how do you kind of like have that confidence and bravado to just actually tell people the truth and communicate your successes and not be ashamed about being proud of the things that you've achieved? Because I think culturally, sometimes we are ashamed about our successes because we don't want to look like we're bigging ourselves up. And I think that's also part of Australian culture as well. Like people don't like people that do that. Whereas I think to succeed, sometimes you have to. And so I think that's how I've kind of broke through. And also as well, because of the way that I think, I've always, every job, I think in terms of CV building, I've always done that. So even within the UK, every single job was like, okay, right, what are the most crazy batshit things do I want to achieve here that no one else has achieved in this role? And then I'm going to set that as a goal. I'm going to tell everyone that that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to achieve it. And once I've achieved all these things that nobody in that role has ever done, I'm going to move on and find a bigger challenge and then basically smash that. And because it reached the point where like you can't argue tangible results, and you can't argue things that like you are, a key driver of, right? Because it's just like, and if you look at all my work, you can see my DNA across all of it. So it's like, at a certain point, you just have to look at historical evidence. So I think that's how you break through the glass ceiling. So I can go to ITV and say, I'm going to build this media brand. I'm going to get 4,500 products. I'm going to work with the biggest celebrities in the world. And they say, how? When most people can't do that. I'll say, well, look at historical evidence. Every single thing that I've done, everybody said is not possible. So if I've done it there and I've done it for this brand and I've done it for this brand, statistically, it should mean that I can do it for my brand. So I think evidence and proof and just actually thinking about things in a way that allows you to circumvent, I guess, like negative, I guess not negative feedback, but I guess like naysayers. Because actually, if you're good at that, then you've convinced people of your worth. And then that's how you kind of break through, and that's where the opportunities come from.
Yeah, and you mentioned there as well about like how the evidence of what you've done so far gives people the belief that you can do whatever you put yourself forward for now. Can you go through this? You mentioned a few of the things you did, right? What you did, a LadBible, the award you won.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that? Like, here's a platform to big yourself about the work you did. And also what I want to understand too is like you sent, like originally it's about the creativity or go into the media space.
Yeah.
But a lot of the work you mentioned as well had a real purpose behind it too.
Yeah.
With the mental health and changing things to become more like deeper in meaning, right? And actually meaningful.
Yeah.
Where did that side of things come into play as well? Like why did you go down that route?
So I guess like in terms of purpose and all this stuff, the reason I went into media is because I never felt like I had a voice. I felt like people, like, you know, like, and prior to like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, never saw an Asian person in a movie or in a TV show. And when we did, they were always portrayed negatively. Growing up in Australia all the time, the only time I see Asians is when they were talking about how they were in gangs or how they were like taking over the country or whatever. So ultimately, I wanted to get into media so I can basically put a different point of view. And I guess like because of the situations I've been in, I'm very empathetic towards kind of making a positive difference in the world. So, you know, like having access to these audiences and also being able to look at the business objectives and then also marry it up with things that I'm passionate about. That's when you can create real power because you're doing things that are actually driving the company forward, but then subsequently you're also leveraging things that can make real genuine cultural impact. So that's kind of where that's come from. In terms of, I guess, like tangible results and kind of like what I've done, I think like, you know, advice, for me, it was about like, you know, I was brought in to double their audience and kind of help them drive scale. So that was something that was a big thing there. And then obviously as a part of that, there's like the brand strategy, the social strategy, because like all that is designed to drive growth at the time. With LadBible, they couldn't get any advertisers because people didn't think they were like a brand that was safe. So what I did was redefine what Lad meant by creating impactful, creative, social purpose-driven campaigns to demonstrate that actually their audience was the opposite of what you might think. And that ended up helping them kind of unleash so like a lot of kind of like big brand partnerships. So I think like, you know, like I always look at I guess like what the objectives of the business are. And then I try to find creative ways to tell stories and match that with content to use it to kind of drive cultural impact. That's kind of like my specialty. And I guess like after you do it a few times, you start to understand how those ecosystems work and how those things marry together. And I guess like now it's just become kind of a little bit like second nature.
That's incredible. And just think like, I guess a lot of people, for example, they would have seen those changes as media organizations, but not really known you were behind it. So, for example, I knew that LadBible was what it was before back in the day.
Yeah.
But I had no idea it was you who did that until I met you, right? And that's the kind of stories, part of it is about getting out there, right? Showing that that was an Asian who did that.
Yeah.
Where sometimes people might have no idea about that.
100%. Well, I guess also as well, like at certain brands, they don't kind of like let you talk about your work publicly, right? And I guess like since then, like with Boiler Room and with my own business, there's definitely a freedom to do that. But yeah, 100%. Like I think like LadBible was probably the first time I started to like talk about the work I did a little bit more publicly and also a lot more vigor because like ultimately they never would have done any of that stuff if it wasn't for me. So like fundamentally, I felt like I had a right to. But I actually think like it was really uncomfortable for me. And even now, like I do things on LinkedIn and other platforms that actually contradict the way that I want to do things because it's not natural for me to talk about how great I am or that the work that I've done is like, impactful or whatever. But on the flip side, these are things I'm all driven by passion. And I am proud of a lot of that stuff. And actually, if it means that I feel a little bit like a dickhead sometimes, but like we get more advertisers or more people know about the good things that we're doing, then maybe that doesn't matter, right? So I think for me, it's trying to almost like go against the grain of the things that I've been taught, because I've seen obvious impact for doing it in this other way.
And so you mentioned with Woo as well, right? Because you're going into a business now, you've got control, you can say what you want in many ways.
Yeah.
And you said when you pitched it to ITV, what was it about the pitch that you think really got it? So obviously your history,
yeah.
But what about what you said you're going to do in the future?
I think I have a very clear vision. I think one of the things that I am really good at is coming up with an idea and being able to kind of tell you exactly how I'm going to execute it. So with Woo, I built a media brand that had a social strategy, marketing strategy, comm strategy, content strategy, all kind of like design and working together alongside how we're going to use that media proposition to drive our e-commerce proposition, right? So usually with media brands or businesses, you have a founder CEO who comes up with an idea and brings people in to build all these other elements. And then there's usually conflict because not everyone's aligned and all this other stuff. I guess like the USP around kind of what we've done is I've built everything because I've had experience in all those areas to work in conjunction with each other, which means that we can be quite agile because, we don't have the biggest budget in the world, and we can be quite impactful because every single thing that we're doing has intention. And I've been able to bring in an amazing team on board to kind of like help bring that to life and add their own flavor to it. But ultimately, everything that we do fits in with the other parts of the business. And I think that's why we've been able to kind of move forward very quickly. And I think that's what ITV appreciated, because everything was strategically considered. And actually, every single objection or question mark they had around the business, I already had an answer to, because I thought about everything from the bottom up.
And how have you found it running your own business? Because obviously beforehand, you were leading these massive teams, but you didn't have the ultimate decision about the guidance, right? And now you've got that full control.
Yeah.
How's that transition been?
It's really good for my mental health. So I think what that essentially means, the reason I say it's good for my mental health is because ultimately you can't get frustrated at things that go wrong if you're ultimately in control. There's definitely things that you're still not in control of, and I think that doesn't really change no matter where you are, because you still have people you need to report into. I'd say though, the biggest difference is I've been able to integrate the things that I found helpful and eliminate the things that I found toxic about the businesses that I've worked for. But that being said, it doesn't mean that new problems don't come up, and things that maybe I found toxic and horrible and removing those in my head would make for a better workplace. Maybe there are other things that other people find that don't work for them. So I don't know, so I guess ultimately what I'm trying to do is build a workplace that exists in a world that I would want to work for. And I guess it's like an ever-evolving thing. But I think the fact that I have some control around what that looks like is ultimately very rewarding. And it's something that, to me, diminishes a lot of stress, because the thing that I find infuriating is inefficiency and just kind of like lack of collaboration. And I think because of the position I'm in, I'm able to foster that, even though it doesn't always work. So
some people listening right now are going to have their own companies or trying to foster that same kind of collaboration.
Yeah.
What tips would you have for them, or how do you build that kind of culture?
Well, and so I don't have it right, and I think it's definitely a work in progress. But I think the things that our business have that some of the businesses that I've worked for haven't had is there's a real clear vision. There's a real clear purpose. And there's a real clear strategy on how we're going to get to that vision and that purpose. And that means everybody should have a very clear idea of what they're working towards and how they should get there. So I feel like that, to me, is fundamentally really important. I think the other thing is to coach people into getting out of their comfort zones. So out of the comfort zone doesn't necessarily mean like doing things that are like maybe more innovative or more like challenging, which I also encourage, but getting out of the comfort zones into being able to kind of communicate to their managers if they're feeling overwhelmed, communicate to their managers if they need their stuff reprioritized, and to kind of have some onus and responsibility of their own kind of like well-being within the workplace. Because what we can do is create a framework to help to create a place that has like balance. And, you know, like we encourage people to only work within their hours. We encourage like constructive feedback, and we give people mental health days and all these other things. But ultimately, you know, if you're not good at your job, it's going to be stressful. If you're not, if you're overworked and you're not communicating to your boss and your boss doesn't know, that's going to be stressful. There's definitely an element of personal responsibility that I think sometimes people don't really think about. And that's something that I really want to instill within the team, because people can't help you if they don't know what's wrong.
How many employees do you have now? How many?
Well, around 40.
Yeah, and that's obviously grown quite a short amount of time as well, right?
Yeah. So we've been around for a year.
And in that space of a year, it's obviously grown very quickly like that, but also the impact and the growth you've had in terms of consumers. What are some of the things that you had in the initial plan that maybe didn't work how you expected and you had to adapt and pivot?
I think maybe some of the things, it's tricky because like I feel like so many things have happened and so many things have come out exactly the way I wanted, if not better than the way that I wanted. I guess maybe some of the challenges is like, I guess like we're still within the framework of a big business like ITV, and there's definitely conflict in how a startup works versus how a big business works. So that ultimately caused maybe some delays and maybe some like a slower turnaround time on some of the things that I wanted to experiment with. But yeah, I'd probably say that was probably the biggest thing. In terms of like reception, in terms of like how people kind of engage with the brand, it's been really amazing. And, you know, like on one side, I guess like the part of my brain that has self-doubt is surprised and pleasantly surprised. But then there's another part of my brain that kind of already knew that this was going to happen, because I felt like we were developing something that was not only interesting, but I think very needed in the context of today's society.
Let's say some people who are Gen Z right now listening.
Yeah.
And they haven't used Woo yet.
Yeah.
What would be your version of telling them why it's something they should check out?
So I guess like Woo is essentially redefining wellness for Gen Z. And what that means is basically taking this idea of wellness and integrating it into culture. So we do this through storytelling, we do this through entertainment, we do this through products. And a lot of the things are designed to help people navigate kind of the stresses of the modern world. So I'll give you an example. We have a series called High Frequencies, and basically that's built around this idea of sound healing. So when you go to sound healing in, like, let's just say London, it's usually a bit woo-woo. There's bowls, sometimes there's a guy in dreadlocks, and it just feels a bit cheesy, very Goop, very Gwyneth Paltrow. It's like, what if we could take that concept, which is essentially there are frequencies that trigger things in your brain to calm you down, to make you feel more relaxed, to put you into a trance. What if we got neuroscientists to take those frequencies and put them to tracks from like pop stars like Ash Nico or Biba Doobie or Vegan, and then create like an immersive experience that can be leveled, that can be distributed digitally? Then we're getting people that are interested in those pop stars or interested in those tracks to essentially physically feel something, and to physically feel something and be like, hey, if this works, what else works? So we've got a hypnotherapy series that's coming out with one of the stars from Avatar, and it's literally a 30-minute session where if you watch this video, you will get into a trance, you will get hypnotized. And that's, again, taking something that is maybe not very accessible and putting it through a pop culture lens. And then beyond that as well, like we have fashion, we have wellness, we have like music, arts. We're essentially a cultural proposition. The reason why wellness is integrated into every facet is because the headspace of society at the moment, like I think Gen Z are quite frustrated with the state of the world. They're quite frustrated with the media brands that speak to them in a way that maybe is a bit condescending. And maybe we just talk a lot, but there's no solutions. What we're trying to do is provide solutions, but not hit people over the head with them. Just make them so easy, make them so interesting or entertaining that they just integrate it into their lives without even thinking about it. And I think that's why it's an exciting proposition.
And what's the dream for it all, right? Where do you see this someday ending up?
I guess like at the moment, the marketplace only sells to the UK, and, ideally we would expand that globally. And I think, there are so many amazing brands across wellness and fashion that we really want on our platform that currently don't exist in the UK. So that would be something. But I think ultimately, so we kind of like with Woo, we kind of call like our universe the Wooniverse, right? And this is kind of like a third reality, the most optimistic part of your brains. It's like we don't reject reality, but we try to see the best of it, and we try to come up with solutions to make people feel less helpless, right? So what if we can create physical spaces that kind of integrate wellness, travel, culture, design, and relaxation? Like that would be the ultimate dream for me, to kind of create these spaces or resorts or these destinations that can encompass this third reality that we're trying to create digitally.
That's like really interesting to see. I'm fascinated to see like where this story ends up as well, because obviously you're only a year in so far. We've already achieved so much. So it's been interesting to see like what happens in the future, and like when all these things that you're planning now, when they come to fruition as well.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to move to the quick fire questions now for timing wise.
Yeah.
So the first one is, who are 3 British Asians that you love to shout out that you think people should be paying attention to?
Yes, my friend Ravi, who is the CEO founder of Salsop, collaborator of a lot of Woo's content, and someone who is a visionary when it comes to content creation and brand consultancy. I guess like Susie Lau is Susie Bubble, a real pioneer in the fashion space and driving advocacy for British Asians. And then my friend Amir from Boiler Room, he is the creative director of Boiler Room, but he also was the founder of For Free, which is a platform I worked on when I was there, which he's just super interesting. He's has like an amazing tutorial eye. He's just like kind of on the forefront of culture, and he's constantly surprising me with the stuff that he's working on.
Yeah, amazing. So everybody check those people out. Next one is, if people listening right now could look for help or guidance from you, what should they reach out about?
I guess the things that I wish I had help or guidance around that I think I can offer is advice on how to kind of like plan out your career or your roadmap. I think I'm very good at manifestation, and I think I'm very good at kind of like figuring out what those ladders are, but I think like I did a lot of things the hard way, and I kind of don't want everyone else to kind of like follow that same path. So I think there's definitely some learnings that I wish somebody had imparted on me when I was kind of, like moving into the career ladder. But I guess like in terms of like marketing, content, driving, like, pitching businesses, those are all things that I can definitely help with.
And then on the other side, is there anything that you need help with right now, or who needs help with?
I guess we're always looking for young directors, young writers, young people across social media, especially from diverse backgrounds. So, if you've got something interesting, if there's a film that you want to make, if there's anything that you want to contribute to, like the Wooniverse, then get in touch.
Perfect. So thanks so much for coming on today.
No worries.
It's been a real pleasure. Have you got any final words for the audience?
Yeah, I guess listen to what your parents say, but not too hard.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for listening. It means a huge amount to us, and we don't think you realise how important you are, because if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you leave us a 5-star review, it makes a world of difference. And if you believe in what we're trying to do here, to inspire, connect and guide the next generation of British Asians, if you do those things, you can help us achieve that mission, and you can help us make a bigger impact. And by doing that, it means we can get bigger guests, we can host more events, we can do more for the community. So you can play a huge part. So thank you so much for supporting us.